Hello and welcome to Media 7. This week we're looking at the sometimes uneasy relationship between journalism and academe, and in particular between journalists and those who teach the trade. By way of introduction, Simon Pound reports on a recent meeting that focused on clashes over journalistic practice, but almost forgot to get the journalists themselves along.
In 2006, North and South published Asian Angst, Is It Time to Send Some Back? It was subject to a successful press council complaint for being discriminatory and inaccurate. In 2008, the Ministry of Social Development decides to hold a conference and talk about it. They convene with Jim Tucker, journalism teacher, Charles Mabbutt, Asian New Zealand, Joris de Brez, race relations conciliator, Keith Ing, press council complainant. This well-meaning collective didn't make everyone happy. Concerns emerged. People like veteran editor Carl Dufresne worried that the people responsible were not invited and that there were no practicing journalists. Was this a closed court? Was this practitioners versus pontificators? NBR journo David Cohen thought so.
And I was pretty appalled, actually.
And he also wondered, why were the ministry putting this on?
I don't have the foggiest.
The Asian Angst author, Deborah Coddington, was bemused.
What they are trying to achieve as balance in the media is not achieved by not inviting the other side of the debate.
They decided to crash proceedings. But panel chair Jim Tucker got wind of this move and at the 11th hour tried to invite Deborah and did get Carl Dufresne on the panel. So, angry communities, an old article, journo noses out of joint, almost gate crashing, and a ministry, well, we're not sure what the ministry has to do with things. So what better solution than getting together for a seminar, complete with bad AV,
hello,
and good refreshments.
So I think it's unfair to accuse North and South of singling out Asian things.
Emotions were high.
if Asians are portrayed in the media on a regular basis as criminals, wife beaters and so on, the general public is going to get a pretty negative view.
Debate occurred.
We're not actually saying that people can't publish these things, but that they shouldn't.
Carl really balanced up the panel.
I think there was a lot in that article that stood up.
Deborah was panned.
But this thing did not pass any criteria as far as I was concerned as a piece of journalism. It was a piece of junk.
Deborah strikes back.
You might understand that no, I'm not racist, and that I was commissioned to do an article and to follow a brief, which is what I was paid for.
And Jim apologised.
And I want to thank Deborah for being here today, and again apologise for not inviting you in the first place.
Having multiple points of view helped.
The problem is getting some balance, because the industry people are a bit shy of attending these things.
Ministry organiser Tracy White.
Yeah, I was really pleased with it because we had this great dynamic sort of discussion where people weren't all agreeing with each other. And sometimes when you work in social cohesion, you find that you are talking to a whole lot of people who basically think the same way.
That's the best debate we've had in 2 years I've been involved in these sorts of forums.
Because it is easy to just, talk to people who already agree with you.
Because what would be the point of that? So, an enlightening day, but there is that one unresolved issue. Why the ministry?
But God only knows.
The Ministry of Social Development and the Office of Ethnic Affairs jointly lead a project called Connecting Diverse Communities, which focuses on social cohesion in New Zealand and how to promote social cohesion. Part of our program of work is that we run good practice forums, and we've been running them for about 18 months.
Maybe Jim can tell us.
The ministry provided some funding.
Aha! Money. A funny day. Controversy was avoided and talking really did help. Refreshments were enjoyed by all. But still, we're left with 3 questions. What has it really got to do with the ministry? What is the point then of their normal seminars where everyone agrees? And what can be done about the divide between practitioners and pontificators?
Simon Pound with that report, and I like to think I work in social cohesion as an amateur. To discuss matters arising, we're joined by 2 people who featured in that report and one who didn't. Jim Tucker, head of the journalism course at Whitireia Community Polytechnic in Wellington, NBR media columnist and journalist who covers tertiary education, David Cohen, and former publisher of the independent Business Weekly, Jenny McManus, one of the country's more noted on-the-job teachers of journalism. Jim, if we could start with you, it's a slightly oblique way into our topic this week, but we did want to cover it. I've read the blurb about that forum, and I'm still not sure what it was about. Can you give us, do you have another go at explaining what was going on there?
Well, I guess we'd tried to interest industry in this sort of stuff because I think they are starting to get interested for purely commercial reasons. Half their market now isn't from the so-called majority culture, so they're starting to lose money. We tried bringing Arlene Morgan out from Columbia Journalism School, one of the world's top journalism schools, and we got a pretty meagre attendance the previous year when I was in my previous job. So we tried another tack, and that was basically to launch a competition where we invited young journalists to submit the sort of work they're doing in this area, reporting our diverse population.
But
you
claimed you were having a debate.
Yeah, but see, we had no money to put on the...
There was no one on the other side.
No, look, we had no money to put on the awards. The industry won't stump up. I mean, they're absolutely mean when it comes to paying for training. So I went to Joris de Bres and I said, look, can we get some government funding to pay for this? Charles Mabbitt had already stumped up from Asia New Zealand. So it cost about $15,000 to bring Arlene Morgan out here. So he said, well, the ministry is interested in getting some debate going about this. They'll stump up with some money. So I was highly amused by what happened because I had invited people like Tim Pankhurst from the Dominion. He was busy. We know probably now what he's busy with. People like Terry Brown from New Zealand. Terry, unfortunately, was unavailable. And I just know from previous experience that everyone's too busy. So we didn't. That's why we didn't invite Deborah Coddington.
That is the irony, because I know at least one of the people on that panel, Charles Mabbitt from the Asia New Zealand Foundation, has run events for working journalists, and they don't turn up. Well, actually, so is the way. Yeah, was there your cunning plan to get him to turn up by not inviting?
Hey, he has better luck. He puts on a better lunch than we had no lunch. But what I find amusing is that probably if we'd invited Deborah and David et al., they would have laughed and ignored us. But fortunately, they thought there was some sort of conspiracy. So they turned up mob-handed, and we got a decent debate.
You thought there was a conspiracy, David?
I thought it was going to be an instance of the sound of one hand clapping.
You're right, it was. It was going to be.
It was going to be.
I mean, to be glib, I mean, one could say one of the primary purposes was to allow Simon Pound to compile one of the funniest reports I've seen for some time.
But seriously, for all the fretting about Mandarins passing judgment on on working journalists, which is something that Carl Dufresne, who was on the panel, has repeatedly sounded off about, I wonder whether we've lost sight of the fact that it was actually a very good work of journalism that got this rolling. Key thing, on Declaration of Interest on the website that I run, he took that story apart on the facts as quoted in the story. And I wonder whether we've kind of forgotten that.
I don't disagree with that. I think we've hashed over this particular story enough, though, and I think notably absent in the hashing has been the editor who oversaw...
who wrote the cover line.
Who wrote the cover line, who commissioned the piece, and very much drove it, as is her wont. That's no criticism. Be that as it may, I think we've all had enough Asian angst, and incidentally, why is it no one ever pronounces that word correctly?
But before we move on, that general concept of, something that Carl again has said, of people passing judgment on working journalists in private media organisations who do not know the realities of that work. Do you think there's anything in that?
Well, the news media is depending how you tally these things, is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And it certainly should be scrutinised even more, and there aren't really an august company of experts, who can, alone are capable of doing that. I don't mind criticism. One of the Stetsons I wear is that of a media critic, so I can hardly criticise others for doing that. Carl Dufresne does make a good point. There's an old cliche in the business, I'm sure you're familiar with it, any idiot can edit yesterday's paper, and I suppose the truth of that is particularly borne in on editors, who work night and day, and they don't really want to hear retrospective wisdom.
Jenny, you've trained journalists both in academic settings and on the job, as I said, and I think you and Warren established a real reputation at the Independent as being, you know, people who could transform journalists. What do you make of the way that young people are trained now for the profession? Is it better? Is it worse? What's going on?
Well, all I can compare it with is the training in the newsroom and the sort of training that I did when I was at AUT, which was then called ATI in the mid-80s. And then it was a good course, the journalism course in Auckland. And none of this, Jim, actually applies to you because I think you're great and you are completely excluded from these comments. But I think nowadays...
Please don't exclude me.
Nowadays, the politics run by people who probably haven't been near a newsroom for decades, sometimes if ever, you wonder. So you're not talking about working journalists who know what goes on in a newsroom, knows the pressures of daily journalism and knows what editors want. And secondly, they never come near the industry to find out what sort of people we want and what we want taught.
And they would say that's not our job, what we're doing is teaching young people to think.
Well, that is not their job. The last thing you want is a journalist who thinks, for God's sake. You want somebody who can actually... What you want is a good young person with scepticism, an inbuilt bullshit detector. You want an educated person. You want somebody who's dedicated, persistent, courageous, all those things. And you're not going to get that at AUT or any of the polytechs. I mean, we have students...
Surely some things have changed now. I mean, I remember your job ads were famous. Because you quite clearly didn't want anyone who sat down at the computer and used Google. You wanted people who'd go down the pub and meet sources.
Well, that's exactly what's wrong, and you see it in newsrooms now. Even those reporters are not trained at Polytech. They sit there online looking for stories. What we used to do was go down to the pub and talk to people, and you get far more stories like that than you do looking at websites and what other people have published.
Can I just pick you up on something? You said that we don't want them trained in universities and Polytechs. I think we do want them trained in Polytechs, because we're still... doing the sort of thing that you're talking about.
Well, I'd prefer to train them myself.
Yeah,
I mean, what I would like is the sort of person we turned out in the mid-80s, where they did a 6-month course and they could do court reporting, council reporting. They knew what the Commerce Commission did, the Securities Commission, because that's another of the problems. There's no training in finance, and it all comes down to money in the end. It doesn't matter what round you're doing. It all comes down to money. And I saw that when I was at the Sunday Stay. You'd have young women who were doing really well at their rounds, property and things like that, and then they'd come up against the fact that they were financially illiterate. And none of the politics does anything about that. I'm actually going to come
back to you on that in the course of things like business journalism. But we'll take a break now.
Well, it's not just business journalism.
Yeah. We'll take a break now, and when we come back, we will look at facts and who's checking them.